So hi everyone, and welcome to our joint chapter gathering with the Northeast chapter, the Greater Boston chapter, and held at Malden Anglers. Our speaker tonight is going to be Geof Day, who is one of the founding members of the Searun Brook Trout Coalition. Do I have that right?
Yep.
And I'm not going to give you his bio, but I'm just going to say that Geof knows more about Searun Brook Trout, I think, probably than anybody.
Well, okay, keep going, because I have a question for the audience, but you keep going.
And I was going to let you take over.
Ready when you are. Okay,
so
great.
Come on up.
So I've got to introduce myself. I've got a background in ecology. I've grown up in Massachusetts, and I've moved to Maine. And you want to know where I am in Maine? Look at the coast and go as far east as you can. We're up in East Machias. You pull that back or widescreen it or whatever. So East Machias and the work up there is very interesting. I'll talk about it a little bit later on. But I live within about 12, within an hour circle of about 12 salter streams right next to my house. So I'm very, very lucky to go up there. So that's a Maine trout. My question to you is, has anybody ever caught a salter here? Yes, yes, yes. Whereabouts? Quick. Yeah. Really? Cool. Barry Brook, right. Okay. Was that a brookie or a brown trout? Brown. Okay. So my primary focus is wild, native, sea-run brook trout. And we'll talk a little bit about brown trout. I love brown trout for a variety of reasons, but as far as I'm concerned, brown trout eat brook trout. So if you've got a native population of brook trout and somebody's putting brown trout in there, the brook trout will not do well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So this is a little bit about me. So I'm a brat. I grew up on Cape Cod in the summer. This is my mom. This is 1963, my glamourpuss ma and my glamourpuss father. And basically, my love of Cape Cod has converted into, of course, a love of fishing, but at some point, fishing turned into fish. I'm much more interested in fish than I am in fishing. James asked me if I've been fishing recently for salters, and the answer is yes, but I'm spending far more time in science and in the lab and doing lab kind of work, and I'll explain that in a bit, to try to figure out more and more science about Searun brook trout so that we can possibly bring them back more, because we certainly have brought them back big time on Cape Cod. So a little bit about me. I hope to get to know some of you guys as we go. I know a lot of you from the Northeast chapter. We're going to go through a bunch of fish, and then I'm going to go back through them again, and I'm going to ask you if you can name which one is a salter. Don't say anything. So we got that one, right? We got that one. I call that a fatty. And that's a famous fish. That's on a wall in one of the Westboro Fish and Game buildings. That's a very special fish. There's another one. You may have seen that one before. And here we have 3 examples of real salters. This guy down here. Anybody have a guess where that is? That's the Raritan River in New Jersey. This guy's fishing for striped bass. He's got a big rod. He's using a big Castmaster, and that's one hell of a brook trout, and he catches them every year there. And my biologist friends don't like this guy because he's telling them, I'm getting brook trout, and they're saying, there's no reason for you to be getting brook trout. We don't stock that river. You shouldn't be getting brook trout. So there's a theory that somebody dumped a bunch in. Nobody knows, but that's got to be about a 3 or 4 pound fish. That's a fabulous fish, and it does look a little bit like it came out of a hatchery, but not sure. So this guy in the middle, that's Nick Rutledge. That's Sheet Harbor, Nova Scotia. He is holding a Searun brook trout, and he is standing in salt water. That is rockweed. He is in a harbor. It's completely salt. It's a really gorgeous situation. And on the far right, your left, those 3 fish were found in a smelt fyke net in a river, the Chandler River in Maine, and the biologist had no idea what they were. So he had to take them back to the office for somebody to actually tell him what was going on. Those are super examples of salter, sea-run brook trout. So let's.
How big are those?
So that I think they're in the 12, 14 range. So backing up, what do you think? Salter or non-salter? No, I'm not getting a strong opinion one way or another. That's a red brook salter. It's called a Memorial Day, and it's one of the earlier gorgeous pictures of these fish, and it tells you an awful lot. So that fly is what's known as a light Edson tiger, and we will be talking about how to catch salters, where to catch salters, and sort of why they do certain things. But that streamer is a very, very popular streamer in that river. But notice the color is yellow, so a Mickey fin will work. Anything with yellow is likely to work. Also, they're eating streamers. They're not eating bugs. So back.
That gill plate looks like the other.
Doesn't it though? But this was confirmed a wild fish. I think it's just the gill is open. But
How big is that?
how big is that net? We all have a net that size. I think that's in the 12, 14 range. So this guy? No, salter or not salter? Not?
Why is it so big?
Salter? That guy? Salter. However, here's where it gets really interesting. How do you tell? Anybody? So I'm just going to go through this. So generally, it's very, very difficult to tell. We can use science, and we can learn a lot from science, but there's a lot we don't know. So how do you tell? If they're in a coastal access stream and they have full access to the ocean, the likelihood, whether they are coming from the salt water or not, we call those salters. That's a general term. They're not generally proven to be sea-run, except for a couple of things. We'll go through that. So the definitive identification, they caught in salt water. That's the clear example. Silvery bright, that's silvery bright. They're silver like that for a couple of weeks after they come in from the salt, and then they lose their silveryness. So that could be a fish came in from the salt 2 weeks ago, and he or she looks just like every other fish in the river. Impossible to tell visually. The other thing, and this is the old timers would call this, they say they're outsized fish. They're outsized in spirit and weight and length. So if you got a fish on, you go, oh my God, what is this? And it comes in and it's little, but it's got a real spirit. Chances are that's a salter because they're eating very heavily when they're in the salt water, and they retain that muscle tone and that spirit when they get into the fresh water. They're usually feeding on minnows or scuds or shrimp, that kind of stuff. They're not feeding on bugs. They might take a woolly bugger, as one of mine did, but they're not likely to be taking dries or simple wets, but you never know. So when you ask the question, is this a salter or not, we went to a lab and we said, how do we know technically what's going on? And I remember writing a check for 10 grand, and I know that there's $30,000 or $40,000 kind of went into this, one of these studies, and another one was 2 years graduate school. Graduate school, 100,000 fully loaded. That's kind of what you're spending. Took us 2 years. So how do you know? Not much else. We don't really know. And we'll get into some of the science as we go on. So evidence supports if stocked, they can go to sea, but we don't know. They did stock a bunch of fish historically in these streams to see what would happen. The theory was if you overstock a stream, the fish will go, crap, I got to get out of here. So they run out, in theory. So they did this in the 50s, and sure enough, they went out, but they never came back. So what's going on there? Are they smart enough to come back? Do they not have the ability to come back? Do they get eaten? Probably they get eaten. Striped bass love to eat trout, as does bluefish, as does seals. So this is one of the studies. This is a study we did through UMass. And notice I'm not named on this, but we're in the document. So this is movement patterns of brook trout inhabiting a restored coastal stream in Massachusetts, preliminary evidence of anadromy. So that's proving that these fish go to sea. It was done by, like I said, a graduate student, 2 years of work, an entire team. This is, Andy is UMass, Ben is USGS at the Connie Labs. Zydelsky is up in Maine now, Whiteley's in Montana. Derbeau is in, I think he's in the Connie Labs, and Steve Hurley is the guy in Cape Cod. So a lot of really cool people involved in this study, and this is what they learned. So can't quite see it, but this is Red Brook right here, and that's where they tag the fish, right there. And this is Buttermilk Bay, and this is so-called, I think, Cohasset Narrows, and this is the Cape Cod Canal right here. And in the old days, we believe that these fish and the Cape Cod Canal fish, because it was a big salter stream when it was the Monument River before it got dug out as the canal, we think that the Red Brook fish and the Monument River fish interacted in the, 1,000 years ago kind of thing. But very clearly, they're moving out into the salt water. They're moving around in the salt water. This is all tidal, these systems. This is called Buttermilk Bay. That's sort of Wareham, Plymouth, Buzzards Bay, and that brook is about 4 miles in length. It's mostly where we do most of our work. It's mostly where the science is coming from, but it's not the only one. There's a number of. Any of you guys been to Red Brook? Yeah. Catch any fish there? Huh? Just looking. Okay. I will be there tomorrow electrofishing, so that's always fun. So here we have a real salter. This is, I don't know how many of you guys know your millimeters, but that's about, the difference between 339 and 408 is about 3 inches. So that fish grew 3 inches in a season. How many fish grow that fast? We've seen one that grew 4 inches in a season. These are the pit tagging stations. These fish have little radio frequency tags in them, and then they swim through an antenna, and it pings the antenna, and we get a sense as to where they are and when. So this fish here hit the antenna at the head of tide. When they hit the antenna at the head of tide, they're either coming in or going out. So this fish came in, went up to the station number 2, which is about a mile up the river stream, and hit that antenna a number of times, went back out, but came right back in, hit the antenna a bunch of times, went out, came back in, went out, came back in, went out, and stayed out. Here we have October, and here we have April. So that fish was in the salt water from October to April. That is a definitive salter Searun Brook Trout. There's no question about it. It's really exciting, and we'll see this fish a lot, and it's kind of interesting, you know how everybody says, oh, the fins are beat up or the tail's beat up, must be a hatchery fish. No question, this is a wild fish. Look at what's going on with this tail. That tail is trimmed off here in both pictures, and we suspect that's a result of, and we know it's a female, working the reds, working the stones to move the gravel around so she can have a brood. And they very definitely reproduce there because we see a lot of young of the year fish. So that's, again, what did that cost? Okay, Steve Hurley probably makes $100,000 a year, fully loaded. Probably doesn't take that much home, but it's got a lot of costs associated with what he does. He works stalking fish and stalking birds, and he works every species on Cape Cod, which is kind of interesting. But he is an absolute passionate guy about Searun Brook Trout. So he's been running this program for over 10 years. There's at least 10, sometimes up to 14 pit tagging stations. A pit tagging station is about $10,000. He keeps them going, as do I when I'm around. And he electrofishes these systems twice a year, because if you electrofish a fish and it's got a tag in it, you got a measurement from before and you got a measurement that day, so you can see the growth rate. So how do you tell it's a salter? Looking at that fish, would you tell? Would you say that's a salter? Would you say that's a salter? You would. Do you see what I see here? That's that same fish. That exact same fish, which is cool because we saw her a number of times. So if you want to know you got a salter, you got to have electrofishing and tagging and a biologist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How else do you know? Well, here's another way. And this was where I wrote the check for 10 grand. And we had, I think, match, and I think it was a $30,000, $40,000 study. We were tasked with catching 400 fish, killing them, putting them in tin foil, sending them to the lab. And the idea was to get fish above in freshwater and below in saltwater. And then take the otolith, which is a stone, an ear stone, slice it in half. You're nodding like you're a scientist. Are you a scientist? I wondered any other scientists in the room? Awesome. So you cut the tiny, tiny, tiny bone in half, you polish it, and then you run a laser across it. And this thing is, I mean, it's tinier than a pencil point. Cut it in half, polish it, and then run a laser across it and use a tool, probably chromatography of some gas chromatograph, and measure the ratio of, you don't have to, there will not be a quiz, the ratio of strontium to calcium. And when they're in freshwater, they have a different ratio than when they're in saltwater. So these are all freshwater fish. These are the heavy-duty salters that go out to sea, and they really go out to sea. And these are what we call marsh trout that sort of go back and forth. And this tells you exactly where they came from. That black thing, that's Chandler, 2007. These fish are Chandler in that range. A lot of these are all over the place, but I think there's Chandler fish in here too. Hard to say, but it might just have been a fluke of nature. We went back a second year to catch more because we didn't have enough. And then when we finished this all, the plan was to have a published paper. And the doctor, this was UMaine, the doctor, a guy named Kinnison, I said, well, we're going to get a paper of this. We've got to publish. And he said, no, can't publish. And I said, why not? And he said, you didn't catch enough fish. So had we caught 600 or 800 or some huge number, and I think the kicker was we only got, these 4 that were totally salt. There were a bunch that washed out because they had problems with the technology or whatever. But had we had more fish, we had a much better picture that would be publishable. This is private, but it tells you an awful lot about what's going on. So here we are back at Red Brook. That tells you a little bit about Red Brook, 4.5 miles long. You can't really see it, but I'll point it out. So this is your Buttermilk Bay here. This is Bourne and Plymouth. This is also known as Buzzards Bay. And so the river goes up like this, up like this, up like this, up like this, up into a pond way up here. And notice the density of summer homes or full-time homes. There's also a lot of cranberry bogs in the area, which we'll talk a little bit about. Sorry about that. I'm going to go back and forth a bit here. So that's what it looks like. And I can tell you, you've got streams here that look just like that. You could have salters in your streams. In the Ipswich, and the Parker, and the Mill. This is a wild, kind of pristine habitat, but these rivers up here are actually pretty good too. So that's what it looks like downstream. We'll see a little bit about it upstream. That's another little bit of fish porn. That's another one. That's not the same one. Notice the tail is not abraded. So how did this all happen? If I went to Mass Fish and Wildlife and I said, I want to restore the Parker River, they'd say, why? And I'd say, we think there's salters in there. And he said, prove it. We had definitive proof from the 1830s that there were Searun Brook Trout caught in all those rivers on Cape Cod. It's in the literature, it's in magazines, it's in newspaper. I have looked very, very hard to see if we have anything like that up here. Not found anything. I've done this presentation many times. No one's come up to me and said, you got to read this book. So spend your time, if you're curious about this, spend your time reading the kind of the gray literature, the stuff that really didn't get published. Maybe it's a little old book or an old magazine or newspaper, but I've searched the internet and I can find nothing about Searun Brook Trout on the North Shore or New Hampshire, which is another thing I'm looking for. So defender proven 1830s. Jerome Smith, we'll see a little bit more about him. Forest and Stream was the precursor of Field and Stream magazine. Really great publication, but it's all really bad reproduction because it's such old things. They've scanned them, and some of it you can read, some of it you can't. There were presidents and congressmen. Daniel Webster was known to fish the Mashpee River. We'll talk about the Mashpee. And we have a number of these documents in our library because they were so critical for these projects to get started. There had to be something that the biologists could say, yeah, we got proof. Yeah, this is a good idea. Guess what? It's been almost $50 million. No one has really done the accounting, but we'll talk a little bit about the money, but there's at least a half a dozen streams on the south side of Cape. You'll see them in a map that have been restored. We'll talk about that. And the Searun Brook Trout that were there have now the population has boomed. And most of them are catch and release, so you can fish as much as you want year round, but you can't take them, obviously. And we recommend, of course, barbless hooks and flies only, but that's not the law. We can't get the law to do that yet. So by 1833, Jerome Smith was writing about these fish, and we'll actually read some of Jerome, but he also said in his book in 1833 that it was already too late. As far as he was concerned, the dams and the cranberry bogs that had been constructed on the Cape by 1833 were hampering the brook trout, and in his opinion, the population had started to tank way back then. So that's kind of interesting. So why was that? How did they fail? How did they start to wink out? Dam construction, failure of fishways. Most fish don't like fishways, particularly trout. So you put in a dam and you put in a herring run, etc. The trout will not go up that ladder. Generally, they'll go down, but they don't generally go up. Cranberry bogs are terrible, anathema to brook trout because it heats the water up and exposes all those little channels to avian predators, birds, and thermal and chemical pollution from agriculture and industry. It's a big bad deal for the brook trout and the herring. So this is Jerome Smith, where the sea trout are found in the greatest numbers and perfection compared to all of the tidewaters in the state. We proceed to mention two well-known rivers which call upon the return of warm weather: Childs River and Mashpee or Mashpee. It's the same system. We speak of catching sea trout in fresh water. 18th of May, middle of May, right now, 1829. Two persons, principally the smallest, had 70 fine sea trout weighing 38 pounds. A number of the largest weighed about 1.5 pounds, but none over. How many of you have caught 1.5 pound fish in Massachusetts? So this is documented. There are numerous other sentences in this guy's book about catching 1/2 basket of brook trout on a tide. And they're eating them. They're sending them home. They're eating them. So this is the Mashpee River, and the Mashpee River has not been restored. It is what we call a reference stream. It's loaded with brook trout, but there's no electrofishing going on. There's no pit tagging going on. There's no habitat restoration going on. It's sort of aboriginal, and it's beautiful. And like I said, you can fish it any time. It's on federal property. Most of these systems are on federal or state property, which means you cannot hire a guide to take you against the law. And we kind of learned that the hard way. So this is, again, more old evidence. The picture on the right, obviously, is relatively new. And I'm going to read this really quick. 2 champagne baskets of fat rosy trout from 1 to 3 pounds. A severe snowstorm, March 5th. Barrels of the fish came inshore and large quantities were collected of a size unprecedented. So here we are again on the Cape. Some of the finest trout streams in America were then be found within a few miles of Barnstable. That's exactly what we're talking about. Fishing with two for less than an hour, 36 trout weighing from 1/4 to 2 pounds each from a pond in Mashpee. That's where the fish can swim up the river and be in the pond. And down here, the trout are not only as plenty, but they are as large, fat, and rosy as out in Carmen's Pond at the fireplace on Long Island. I don't know if you know, but that's where Daniel Webster supposedly caught a huge brook trout, one of the biggest brook trout in history. There's a lot of argument about this fish. Some say it's a joke, and some say it's absolutely true. But Nick Karras's book, which you may have seen, opens, the first chapter is about Daniel Webster and the devil trout. And so the fishing on Carmen's River in those days was phenomenal. But today it's all bad and dammed up and just not good and not going to be restored. Believe me, we've tried. So this is a slide from our friend Steve Hurley. Here, a little bit of history of how they happened. So the state has been buying up land since the 50s. They weren't doing it for trout. They were just doing it because they're just buying up land. Happened to be on these rivers. You're more out of focus than you were in focus. So habitat improvement since 1975, population monitoring since 87. They stopped stocking of brown trout over the brookies in 91. Stream temperature monitoring since 2000. Stream temperatures are very important. Regulations 2002, that's catch and release. Pit tagging started 2007, and then dam removal again and again and again and again, starting in 2008. And a dam is not cheap to remove. So that's, not only do they pull the dams out, but in a lot of instances, they rechannelize the river. The river's often been straightened because it was part of the cranberry system. And originally, the streams were not straight. So let's just imagine, what are they going to look like? They're going to look like this. And they put these trees in on those edges of the oxbow to keep the oxbow from moving. And that root wad at that one end is fabulous trout habitat. And you want to, if you see one of those, you want to be fishing in there. And the trunk of that tree, for every one of those trees, and there are thousands of them, is embedded in the bank, so that tree is not going anywhere. And I've seen these trees arrive by the 18-wheeler load, and they just bring them in. It's like 6 18-wheelers and a huge pile of wood, and it's really kind of cool. So here's some volunteers putting some wood in. There's a lot of volunteer work. This is part of Red Brook. You see all that wood? That is all artificial, and that is loaded with fish, believe me. And there's right along here, and this is tidal. You can't really see the tidal influence, but right along here, there are embedded logs. So there's undercut, naturally artificial undercuts along these banks. So not only are the fish in these undercuts, they're also wherever there's a root ball here, and it's a really exciting place, and that's about a 2-minute walk from the parking lot. So that's an excellent kind of introduction to what large wood looks like in a system, which I don't think we've seen anything like this on the North Shore. Anybody ever put large wood in a river up here? Because mostly people are taking stuff out. People are taking stuff. You got a canoe, you got a kayak, you got a whatever. Trout like wood. This is a big deal, and this works with trout streams all over the world. It's mostly native wood. So this is the head of Red Brook. You see that funny ridgy stuff? That's an old cranberry bog. And the cranberry company said to Mass Wildlife, we want to get out of the cranberry business. Can you take this off our hands? Sure. Yeah, it would cost them $4.5 million. So that's some 600 acres, something like that. And so this is like what I was saying, the channels are all straight. See these grids, that's all cranberry technology. Well, the state has decided, the hell with all that, and put the main channel right here, following sort of a natural curve. There's some interesting topography in here. And so this is now, there's a big pond up here. They have just raised another couple of $1 million to totally restore this because they got to go in and put trees and they got to clear out a bunch of stuff that's been a problem. But that's a good example of what the state does because us anglers have said, we love trout. And the state says, well, you love trout. We'll help you out. You got a question?
How do they find the foul way?
They just invented it here.
Oh, they just.
Yeah, they just said, let's do it over here. Because they didn't have enough money to really do it the way they wanted to. So Fred just mentioned this word, thalweg, T-H-A-L-W-E-G. Thalweg, any definitions? No fair. Fred, anybody can define thalweg? Huh? Huh? Way things fall. Well, so as I understand it, you may know better, but in the river restoration community that I'm a part of, the thalweg is the original channel under the sediment in an impoundment. So if you've got a big pond that's there because there's a dam, and you pull that dam, that water's all going to drain out, but as it drains, it's going to create its own little channel. And it's really fun to see this. I've watched it a number of times, but Fred wanted to know, and you can imagine that that's probably pretty much what it was like. This is a gravel pit right here, so there's elevation here, there's elevation along here. I don't imagine, it might have gone right through here, but we'll never know because nobody's got the many millions of dollars to actually do that search. So Red Brook, think of Red Brook as the second restoration project. Yeah?
Rivers, as I understand, they're going to naturally migrate. Time. So you reckon the original Alway when it's called the Mississippi. The Mississippi has basically moved until they walled it in.
Right.
So that's what I'm kind of curious. Is the point of the would you contain the river artificially? I understand you have to work with what you got.
It's actually a good question, but trout don't like bowling alleys. Fish don't like habitat like this. There's no place to hide. There's no riffles. There's no sort of trout habitat. There's no boulders. There's very little oxygen. And who knows if there's a natural spring in there that's feeding that stream, the likelihood, because of the geologists say this, the likelihood of the springs being along here are much, much greater than being in here. So they move it over here, the water temperature goes down, they plant trees, the shade increases, the water temperature goes down. The trout like it because it's cold. So somebody in the back had a question? Okay, thank you. So that's just one example, but again, Red Brook is the second project on Cape Cod. The first was the Quashnet River. I think somebody's fished on the Quashnet River, and this is Fran Smith, who came back from Vietnam in the 70s and said, I gotta do something. And he started talking with his fishing buddies, and one thing led to another. Tens of thousands of volunteer hours have been put into this system because of Fran. I don't know if anybody's met this guy, but he should be the guy talking, not me. So you've met him?
Back when that all started.
Yeah. And he was a president of the chapter at that time. He became the president of the council. They did a fishing guide to Massachusetts as a book to raise money. But it's basically the big money came from the federal government, in part because there's herring in these systems. And herring are sort of the magic lubricant that makes this all work. It's not really because of us. The state, the recreational fishermen and the fish and wildlife people say, well, we sell a lot of licenses, that's cool. The commercial fishermen that catch cod and haddock, and halibut, lobster, they want more herring because the reason we don't have cod fishing shore these days is there isn't enough forage food for them. So you recreate a herring run, you're going to put millions of herring in. That's a big boom, and NOAA and the federal government will give you money to recreate, reestablish a herring run in a system like this. And they do it all over, up and down the East Coast. Very popular in Maine, and really the driving factor for all of these things. So Fran had this idea at the time. The technology was you put in these deflectors and overhead covers. They call them lunker bunkers. And these are kind of interesting because it was intended to kind of make the sinuosity get back into the river and clear some of the sediment out and expose the gravel and all that other stuff. Guess what? It didn't work. It worked great because it got volunteers, and it worked great because it proved that it didn't work. And the sad thing is that you get in there with waders, if you don't know what you're doing, this junk is all over the place. And they did it with nails, and there's rusty nails all over the place because this stuff is now all falling apart. And I don't like saying that because I don't want to diss Fran. I think Fran did the best he could with the best science of the day. But today, it's all done with large wood, root wads, trees, limbs, intended to naturally reinvent the stream. The bugs like the wood. The trout hide under the logs. They get to eat the bugs. It's a big, big plus. Fran looks a little different these days, but he is still extremely involved. And if anybody wants to go volunteer on the Quashnet River, they have work days, and they love it when people come down. And most of the time, Fran's there, but not all the time. So Fran got this whole thing started. And from Fran, from that one little thing he did, all of this has come out. All of this has come effectively as a result of Fran. And if we had a Fran Smith on the North Shore, you might have the same thing. We don't know. There might be an opportunity up here. We don't know. So this was what was happening in the 70s. The state thought that the best way to sell licenses was to dump a bunch of brown trout into these salter streams and let the salter brown trout get big, and there you have a good example of a really big brown trout. And what do you think is in the belly of that brown trout? Baby brook trout? Probably. Or food that a brook trout would eat. So it's a kind of a bad scene, but my God, what a fish. And there are people today, to this day, that say a salter on Cape Cod is a brown trout, not a brook trout. And they still have dreams of watching these fish swim under this bridge. It's very powerful. These were in the newspaper. There were articles. There were probably TV news sections because this was a really, really special fishery in its day. Well, so this is what happened when they stopped stocking the brown trout. The brown trout did not nativize. They did not reproduce. Down went the brown trout numbers, and the green came up, and that's the brook trout, and the brook trout just keep coming. So there's our most recent fish up to 2018. I don't have anything in the last 4 years. I should probably get it. But you just see the trend here is very definitely upward, and we think that that's probably 200 to 300 fish per mile, which is an unusual number, and something we also should sort of be aware of is that we can make this happen. This is doable.
Why were the brown trout not reproducing? I was told that the brown trout in the Hampton water is something the upwind water that they start to use. But the salters in the Berry Brook, they go up and down, they do like a false spawn, they go up and down the district and back, but they can't actually.
The entire state of Connecticut has been trying to get sea-run brown trout going in all their coastal streams, and they spent millions of dollars, and they're importing different broodstock and different eggs and sea forellins, all these different strains. They can't get it going. They don't naturalize or nativize easy. But has anybody fished the Mousam? Does anybody know what's going on in the Mousam River, just north of where you are? Mousam. But apparently there's young of the year showing up. They're starting to spawn in the Mousam. So something's different up there. We don't know. I was at a dam removal thing this past winter, and they had these fish this big, 3 of them. And they called me up and they said, we don't know what these are. Can you come help us figure? They were fucking brown trout. Huge brown trout. They were not salmon. They were absolutely brown trout. So that's what the Quashnet River looked like in the 60s, I think it's 50s or 60s. So you can see the channels, the straight lines, those are cranberry bogs that have basically started to fall apart. That's the, if you've ever been to Martin Road, this parking lot is, I don't know, you probably fit 20 cars in there. So that's effectively 20 cars wide right there. It's now this wide, and it's beautiful, and it's cold, and it's loaded with fish, and it's a very, very, very special place, thanks to Fran and the state. That's another example further up. So you can see the whole river was, in my words, pooched. Yeah, 1957. And this is further up, and this is always fun. See that kind of square? I'm going to jump across here again. See this line right here? Anybody get an idea? Get a guess what that is? And we call this an impoundment. So they pulled that dam. That impoundment went down to the original stream bed, and that's now beautiful trout habitat, and it's very, very special. And it's one of the better brook trout streams in Massachusetts, and people should know that. So that's the Quashnet. This is a recent one. This is the Coonamessett River, and I don't know if you can see this, but you see this sinuosity here. That's all engineered, and these little sticks here, those are all tree trunks with the root wads facing the water. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, all the way up. And this is just a part of the section. But this is the engineer's version, and then we'll see a little bit about what it looks like in the dirt.
Which way is that flowing? Left to right?
I believe it's left to right. And there was a dam right here. This was a cranberry bog. You notice a little geometry here. It's kind of square with straight edges and stuff. It was a farm. They grew cranberries. I think it's owned by the town now. The town of Falmouth has been extremely aggressive at figuring out how to do this. And it's been wonderful to see the Hui people getting involved because they know how to write grants and they know how to raise money. So that's what that's kind of out of order. That's the Quashnet. You see the cut wood on the right here. They're always cutting the wood down and putting in better trees. This sweet gale is what they're cutting down, and they're putting in trees, real trees that are native, that are going to start shading the river. This is a good example. That's one of the trees that Fran planted. What?
How are they dealing with this?
No beaver on Cape Cod.
Amazing. Yeah. 22 because you wonder what we're saying.
There are otters, but no beaver. So a little bit more of what it looks like in the dirt. This is your root balls. These little posts that stick up are also part of the deal. I think that's for birds. I don't. Yeah. Yeah. At Coonamessett. Yeah.
They do have like
Posts. Yeah. I think it's for birds. Yeah, no, it looks kind of goofy. Yeah. Yeah, so you'll see another picture of it. You'll see the logs there. This is a much bigger shot. It's a big, dirty mess. That was at least $3 million, that section. You see there's a lot of yellow equipment in there. There's a lot of engineering. And that's what it looks like now, which is kind of amazing. And it's got a fabulous herring run, and they got school kids counting the herring. The whole town is super pumped about the restoration because the herring are going like crazy, and the kids count them, and the kids get all excited. And you can kind of say it almost looks natural, you know? And it's going to just grow up and be more and more shady. So there it is in the fall, and there are those posts, and that's what it looks like from the air. You can see the old cranberry bogs. Those will just grow up over time, and you can see these planted trees in here, all planted, it's all engineered. So that's all designed to grow up and shade the fish, bring the water temperature down. But there's plenty of fish in there already. So that's just one. 18, 19, possibly 20 inches. Hard to say. That's Adam Kautza. Some of you probably know him. He's the cold water guy. He will be who we were dealing with for the next 3 or 4 decades. A lot of these guys, Steve Hurley, are retiring this fall. Adam was just hired. He's one of the few PhDs in that organization, and he's a good guy. And you'll probably get to meet him at some point. Oh, Jesus. So this is one of my favorite slides. And I'm kind of jumping around because we don't have a lot of time. I like to cover a lot of territory. I'm about on schedule. So you guys know who Joan Wolfe is, right? So Joan Wolfe, actually Edward Ringwood Hewitt, came up with this concept that there's stages of being an angler. Stage 1 is you're all about numbers. You want to catch a lot of fish, whatever. Stage 2, maybe you get tired of all those fish and you want to catch the biggest, or however you want to challenge yourself. You want to catch a bonefish, you want to get halibut in Alaska, whatever. You want diversity in your fishing. Stage 3 is challenging yourself. Stage 4 is giving back to the sport. So Lee Wolfe, anybody know what Lee Wolfe did in terms of what he gave back to the sport? Yep. How many of you own a fly fishing vest? Lee Wolfe invented that. Sadly, Lee Wolfe kind of died in an airplane crash because he liked to fly alone when he's going to those lakes. But Joan is still very much alive and doing great stuff. And so Lee Wolfe Stage 4 was giving back to the sport, first to promote catch release. Joan's Stage 4 was about defining the fly cast so anybody can master it. And I haven't taken her class, but if I had all kinds of money and time, I would want to go to the Joan Wolfe School of Fly Casting, because I think that'd be really a cool thing to do. Fly Fishing Museum.
Joan Wolfe Fly Casting. She comes here, does lessons here every year.
At Malden?
Yeah.
Wow.
You gotta be a member.
Holy crap, that is cool. I had no idea. That should be in the news. I mean, that you're going to want members. You're going to get members. You advertise that. Anyway, so as far as I'm concerned, so they're talking about 4 stages. I think there's a 5th stage. And my favorite about the 5th stage is, for me, is putting fish back in the water. That's not catch and release. That's how can we get more fish spawning? How can we get bigger populations? How can we get massive populations? How can we put food back in the system so that the fish have plenty of food to eat? What can we do to the watershed to improve the pH or the chemical balance or whatever else it is? I like the big stuff because it's actually quite powerful. And because I work with the Eastern Brook Trout joint venture, there's all kinds of science and technology. Any of you guys participate in a bucket brigade where you're taking limestone into a stream? Very common down south. And they put tons and tons and tons of this stuff all over, and it improves the bugs, it improves the fish, it improves the botany. Everything changes when you change it's actually calcium, not pH, but you put calcium in, suddenly it's kind of like everything comes back. And we can get into why that happens if anybody's interested, but we're not going to get there. So how can we do more? How can we do more? Yes, keep fishing. By all means. This doesn't happen without fishing. The science is interesting, but without anglers, none of this would happen. Keep fishing, stay curious, support your favorite non-governmental organization. This is a good one. TU is a great one. I named Trout Unlimited. Trustees, another great one. I work with the Down East Salmon Federation up in Maine. They're another great one. By the way, thank you, Greater Boston TU and Northeast TU. You guys provided a lot of money to help us buy electrofishing equipment, and that is an extremely cool thing to get from you guys for the guys in Maine. NERR, there's these national estuarine research reserves. There's one up just in southern Maine called, I think it's the Rachel Carson or the Wells Center. That's a great one. The Quashnet River is right on the Waquoit Bay. National Marine Estuarine Research Center, and Annie Fishing Club, Malden Anglers. A great example, but again, you got to fish, but then you got to know that the science has to happen and the advocacy has to happen, or else stuff like this kind of falls apart. So this is a thing that I do that I want to train people in. From a liter of water, we can detect the presence or absence of a species of fish. So with a nice little grant from Northeast chapter, I went up and down. This is New Hampshire, all the way down south of Rockport. All these are little samples where we tested the water, and anywhere we see a fish, we got positive results. But the predominant, these flasks are negative. That's a stockfish, that's a stockfish, that's a stockfish, that's a stockfish. So there are no real good active Searun Brook Trout streams on the North Shore of Massachusetts, but for one location, which I can't tell you where it is. But it's Project Voldemort, and you can Google Voldemort and you'll learn about it. Thanks to Fred and to you. These guys were really instrumental. I wrote it all up with the name of the place in it. And one of the TU guys went through it, removed all the names, edited the pictures so you couldn't tell what you were looking at, because this is a very sensitive population of fish. They cannot risk anglers getting in there, because you take 12 or 15 fish out of this population, that could be the end of it. But the good news is we're learning more about it. I think we have some funding. I think we have some power coming along. I'm working with a client. It's very exciting. So eDNA, I want to have an eDNA study like this every 10 years. Maybe that's going to change. I also want to see what's going on south of that. I never got south of Rockport there. And there's a bunch of rivers, but I don't think there's much of a chance. But nobody knows. And should be confirmed one way or another. Are brook trout there? Now there's a new technology. I've been doing this for 10 years. The cost of a sample is about $30. And then you can ask another species. We're looking for sturgeon, another $5 for every species that you add. So if you're looking for name your favorite fish, this will help you find the presence or absence of them. But you've got to design the question right. The science has to be good, etc. $30, like I said, that may go up a bit. I'm doing this in Maine. I'm doing this in Maine literally to find if we have endangered Atlantic sturgeon in a system below a big dam, because if there's endangered species sturgeon in that system, that dam needs to come down. Yep.
Do you have simple explanation how they're able to do that?
The eDNA?
From the water, how are they able to?
Sure. If you take a fish's DNA and you take it apart, you find a unique set of matches in that double helix, and you test that against all other fish and make sure that sequence is not found in any other fish, and then you make what's known as a barcode. It's like a key in a lock. You make a thing like that, you make an assay that detects that, and then you just put your water in the system, and if you got a match to that string, it's a match. The lock unlocks, the key and the lock work, and you got trout. Now I can't really explain it any further than that, qPCR and all this other stuff and metabarcoding, but effectively it's a lock and key.
So is the DNA from the excretion from the trout? Or how's it get in the water, the DNA?
So if there's fish in a system, yeah, so it's feces, it's slime, it's whatever else it is. Scales, any shed tissue.
They find in the sand they lost that. They lost some fish and they stood up at the wood. And they coming back to Charles River, they lost, could have been pesticides for everyone.
Yeah.
They fish came from another, I don't know, Washington or something. Charles, they think, Charles River. Is that happening with the sand?
So the Santuit, as far as we know, here's another word, extirpated. Extirpated means local extinction. The Santuit, which is considered one of the best Searun Brook Trout streams on Cape Cod for big fish, winked out. And we went in with electrofishing 7 or 8 times. I did my first EDNA testing there 10 years ago. While I was doing my testing, I happened to notice this crew of people marching, with waders on, marching down the stream, 6 people. One of them had a chainsaw, one of them had a hedge trimmer, and the rest of them had shovels and pitchforks. And they were picking up the leaves and putting them on the bank, cutting the wood, cutting the overhead, cutting everything. And you could see that they've been doing it for a long time. So you're absolutely right. The word we use is hides. There were hides where the fish hide in that river all over the place. They go in and cut that wood away. No more hides. So then the ospreys come in, or otters, or whatever, fishermen, whatever, but definitively none. Definitively none. And I'm on the Cape this week. I am going to do EDNA again there. We took fish out of the Mashpee River, and this is with, we had the Brook Trout joint venture, we had the feds, we had all these people involved. And I didn't present it here because it's actually fairly complex, but we put fish back in, and they did not survive.
Back in the center.
Yep.
Is it a problem with the pond too above? Is it a problem with the phosphates and stuff and overdevelopment?
So here's my favorite expression from Steve Hurley, the biologist down there. He says it's a death by 1,000 cuts. So there's a pond that's loaded with cyanobacteria because there's so much nitrogen and phosphorus in the water. It turns green in the summer. The river turns green. Was it the cyanobacteria? Was it the hides? Was it the fact that the golf course is pulling water out of the aquifer? Was it the fact that the golf course put a big osprey platform right over the redds where the fish used to spawn? What was it? Was it the guys that were trimming the trees? You know, who knows? So it's really, really bad. We've worked to put woody structure back into it. We've worked to increase the habitat, and we've basically gone to the mat with the herring people that were doing the clearing for the herring, right? Apparently herring don't like leaves. So, and I don't want to speak negatively about that because they were just doing their job, but they had natural resources sweatshirts on, so I knew exactly who they were. And some of these people have actually become friends through the years, which has really been great. Water temperature is really, really, really critical. And water temperature is something you can do relatively easily. These are $50 sensors. I have some in my bag that you put in a river, and it records the water temperature every 15 minutes for maybe 5 years. So you get this great set of data, and you can learn, is it sufficiently cold in those months of June, July, and August? It's sufficiently cold to support brook trout. So this here, brook trout can't really survive over 70 degrees. I mean, they can, but they really aren't going to be very happy. They're not going to reproduce, and they're super stressed at anything over 70. They really want to be in the 60s, preferably in the 50s. So here we have 50s, 70s, 40s, 70s, 40s, 50s, 50s, 70s, almost 80s, da da da. What do you think's going on here? Any guesses? This is a cold water system on Martha's Vineyard. That's above the impoundment. There's a dam and an impoundment that causes that water temperature to go up. The water flows out over that dam and then must be hitting cold water springs because it brings that temperature down really, really nice. Another impoundment, another high. Again, cold springs bring it down, and then we get this sort of high thing. We've been advocating for the vineyard people to remove these dams for more than 20 years. Nothing happening. From time to time, we get a rumor that something might happen, but they're definitively wild native Searun brook trout in that system. It's in the literature, it's in the state record, and the people of the vineyard, I love them, they're great and all that stuff. And I can't really complain because we're all not native to this country. But they love the swans. They love the impoundment. They love the reflection of the mill on the surface of the water, and that's an artificial pond, and that pond is killing trout. And they'd rather have swans than trout. Move to the vineyard and convince them otherwise.
Swan is an invasive species in Massachusetts.
You can. Permission of the landowner?
You can call the EP and they'll shoot.
The rumor is that swan is actually excellent to eat. They were managed in the UK that any swan belonged to the queen because the queen loved to eat them. So that's why somebody decided they needed to bring them to this country. Yeah. So this little red line here, that's Red Brook. These are some of the other systems. This bottom one, the coldest stuff here is Red Brook, right in here, right in here. So that's probably right there, about 53 degrees. How many people have been in a brook trout stream in the middle of the summer that's running in the 50-degree range? Yeah, it's rare. Yeah, 2 or 3 people. This is Cape Cod. Almost every one of these brook trout streams down there is super cold, and that's one of the reasons why these brook trout are doing so well down there. And so again, you put in the sinuosity, you let the springs come up, you let the trees grow over, you're going to help that water temperature come down, and you are building brook trout habitat. It's going to take some time, but it's absolutely worth doing. We're wrapping up real soon, and it's not all fun. We had a political problem. There was a big developer that was building a huge racetrack casino complex with a shopping mall and all this stables for the horses, massive, right in the headwaters of Red Brook. And we all went to town and said, "Oh, fucking way." And GBTU helped. TU, this is the Southeast Mass TU chapter, but we had a lot of support from the TU Council and Greater Boston, et cetera, and we stopped the devils. Absolutely stopped them cold, and they can't do anything. And this bottom thing I never used. It fit, that's somebody doing something on the Colorado River, and it just happened to fit exactly. And I called him up and I said, "Can I have permission to do this?" And the guy says, "Sure." But somebody said, "Don't use it." But anyway, but we had a lot of fun, sign carrying. This dinosaur, we still don't know who it was, but some dinosaurs showed up to protest the development. So it was amazing because the word spread and all these non-anglers got involved, which was very exciting. So here we are back at Cape Cod, and this is showing you exactly where these systems are and what's going on here. So Red Brook is on this side of the canal. That's Buttermilk Bay there. Red Brook runs up like this. Route 25 goes like this. So Red Brook goes under Route 25, and then it goes way, way up. So Red Brook, Coonamessett, Childs, Quashnet, Mashpee, Santuit River, Scorton, Pamet, Fresh Brook. These were all once well-known Searun Brook Trout streams, and maybe there's a hint here. What do you think red means? Black means they've been extirpated. Not happening. Scorton Creek, no way. They stock with brown trout. Santuit River, in our lifetime, just recently. Marston's Mills, probably in the last 100 years. Fresh Brook in Wellfleet, we may have hit a jackpot there. That's a documented system. We've got literature from the 1800s that proves there were Searun brook trout in there. So we are mounting an effort. It's probably 20 years now, and we just heard word that we might be getting the first large check on that. I won a Mass Environmental Trust $25,000 grant to do a study in there. I didn't take a cent from me, but we've done a tremendous amount of work there. One of the great things about Fresh Brook is it's mostly on federal property. That's National Seashore National Park Service land, and they like it. This is something very unique for Cape Cod. There's not a single brook trout stream that flows into the bay. Fresh Brook would be the only one. Pamet River probably will never go anywhere because it's just too small a system. There's not anything, there's no restoration that you can do. At Fresh Brook, we have 2 undersized culverts and another culvert that's causing the tidal flow to not happen. The fish can't get up or down. Herring can't get up or down, and it's just a big mess thanks to the highway department that put in these 2-foot culverts under Route 6. Just the river is much bigger than 2 feet will allow. So here's something that's really interesting. This is 20 minutes from downtown Boston, and the data's there. I guess I'll name it just because I can. I'm not supposed to. So this is Third Herring Brook, which feeds into the North River, and this is densely populated. There used to be a dam here. I thought I had a picture of the dam. There used to be a dam. That green grass back there is flat. That used to be the impoundment, and it's all just dry mud now and beautiful grass, flat, 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 growing up all kinds of. Tack Factory Dam, yep, and we supported a number of other, I think the TU chapters supported it. Here we are with the solar panels building a pit tagging antenna. So we pit tag the fish so we know where they are. We've proven that they're moving. We haven't been able to identify that they're getting down to the saltwater because it's, I don't know, 18 miles or something, but they can now. They couldn't before. These fish have been bottled up behind that dam for something like 300 years, 20 minutes south of Boston, and there are definitively wild brook trout in that system. 20 minutes north of Boston, you could have the same thing. I know I've done my work. Somebody needs to pick it up and keep going, but these are not stocked fish. These are wild native fish. And the guy down on the bottom here, that's Warren Winders, kind of a primary guy behind a lot of this work. And in the cooler is the first line caught brook trout in 300 years at that river. So it's very, very, very exciting. It's been a lot of fun to be a part of that. And here's a little more data. What can we learn about Cape Cod fish? So here's that same big fish, and here we are talking trout per mile, Quashnet approximately 300, Red Brook approximately 600. These are fish per meter, and it's measured by 0.2345. Red, of course, is Red Brook, and you see that it varies quite substantially. Blue here is the Quashnet. Doesn't vary that much. They say the fishing is actually better in the Quashnet River than Red Brook. Why is that? Maybe the access is better, or it's a deeper river in places, or better holes or something. But there's way more fish at Red Brook as of 2018. And this is the Childs. The Coonamessett just started here, and we don't quite know why it's going down, but we think there's a technical reason, and we could figure it out. But I was just there yesterday, and we got a brook trout almost 1 every 100 meters. So 1 every 100 meters is right here. It's kind of at the bottom of things. And this is the system, so it's down under 100 back in September 18th. Those are stocked from the Mashpee River. So they're stocked, but they're wild native sea-run brook trout from the Mashpee River, reintroduced, called the nearest neighbor theory, into the Coonamessett and the Childs River. We did the same thing at the Mashpee. It didn't take at the Mashpee. Didn't take at the Santuit, but it did take at the Childs. It did take at the Coonamessett, but we aren't sure why that decline is there. So what can we learn about from Cape Cod is you got the right guy, Steve Hurley here. You get the right team, you get the right volunteer, you get the right champion. You got to have a champion. There's got to be somebody up there waving the flag and saying, we got to do this. I've moved to Maine. I'm doing this in Maine. My organization, the Searun Brook Trout Coalition, has failed. We couldn't raise enough money to pay my salary. These are Searun Brook Trout hats. I'm giving them away because I can't sell them. My 501c3 has been dissolved. I am very happy about this because I don't have to do any more bookkeeping. I don't have to do any more fundraising. I don't have to worry about members or newsletters or any of that stuff. My guys up in Maine are going to do that with me. And part of the problem was I was all alone. My partner died Warren retired, another guy quit. So the four original founders came down to just me. And I tried to recruit, and I tried to train, and I tried to hire, find somebody. It just didn't work out. I ran out of time and energy. Maybe that's the best for me. But this is a sort of a picture of what it takes. These are the agencies and the organizations that either gave us money or gave us technical help, or purchased land, or Cape Cod National Seashore, UMass, Division of Ecological Restoration, key player. Patagonia gave us money. Bought my first GoPro camera with money from Patagonia. Eastern Brook Trout joint venture has been a tremendous source of technical support for me. American Rivers, they were one of the original founders of the Red Brook Project. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Downy Salmon, Maine, Audubon, USGS. USGS, strangely enough, the Geological Survey, they're the people in charge of brook trout for the United States. Kind of funny. Why isn't it Fish and Wildlife? Well, there's a long story. I'm not going to get into it, but it's not Fish and Wildlife. They're off at USGS, which is different. So I'm wrapping this up. How are we doing for time? We're about over, 15 minutes over. I'd love to get some questions from the scientists in the room, if anglers, anybody, any questions, or we can wrap this up. Go ahead.
There's some restoration going on in the Town River.
Yeah.
They have those brook trout, they trout, and they get to the ocean back with them.
I think they took out 8 dams there. Yep. We don't talk about it because it's not supposed to be talked about. It's about herring there. And if you talk about trout too much, people are very afraid you're going to get anglers in there and it's going to wipe the trout out. And I don't really believe that, but I am forced to believe that. I am forced because a lot of the people that I work for insist upon it. There's a number of streams I can't name all the way up the coast. The Plymouth is one of them. There's 4 up there. I can't name them. There's at least 8 going down the coast on the way to New Bedford. Bread and Cheese, the Westport, the West Branch of the Westport, the Weeweeantic, They all once had Searun Brook Trout, and they may have them again. There's a huge dam in one of the Westport rivers. Ain't going anywhere. But below that dam, I'll bet you can catch a salter today. And it's totally accessible. It's just nobody knows. So here's a question. If I spend my life fishing a stream for Searun Brook Trout, and I'm the only guy that fishes it, and I go to my deathbed and I never reveal the secret, what happens to the fish in that stream? Huh? There's no way, no one's going to stop anybody from putting in a supermarket or parking lot or whatever. So we have to talk about this stuff. So we have to name this stuff. So we have to break this code of silence. I'm in Maine and they will not talk about names. And it turns out we think that the bulk of the fish in Maine aren't in these rivers because of the poachers. Mainers love to eat brook trout. I was fishing in a brook trout pond the other day, listening to these guys talk. I was not a part of the conversation. And one of the guys said, yeah, I don't like these fish. I'm waiting for the salters to come in. I much prefer eating a saltwater brook trout than a freshwater brook trout. Nobody knows how many fish the poachers are taking. And we have evidence back in the 1800s that the poachers were really taking a lot of fish out of the Cape streams. Who knows what was going up in Maine? There's a couple of rivers. This is kind of fun. There's a river in Maine where they said there was enough fish that there was an illegal market fishery. They'd catch the fish and ship them to New York. It was a business. Big enough population to support a business like that. They shut it down. But that we call that a trout factory. And I'm working on that system. It's not quite as good. We're also having the same problems up there. Water levels are falling and such. So wrapping it up, anybody else? Fred? Fred's been there, by the way.
Yeah, you mentioned our project, Voldemort.
Voldemort, yes.
And in your opinion, would it make any sense for the Northeast chapter to start putting
At this time, all we can do is ask questions. This system, I don't know if you saw it, but as the water gets closer to the sea, it's urban, and all the landowners and the fire department and the restaurant and the families that own the water, the river side edges, say, oh, we don't like that river, and they put up stone walls, and it's straight like a bowling alley, and they would not like anybody going in there and putting wood in their system. So that's not going to happen, but something might happen in there. But this is a historic system, massive golf course. Huh? It is. Yeah, and all we found up there were fish this big. We're finding fish this big down in town. What's going on? We think the fish above the golf course, don't make a guess, and the fish below the golf course are genetically separated by the golf course. But we don't know. There's no genetic studies. We have to do our own genetics. Hopefully, we're going to be doing that, hopefully this year. Yeah? Strangely enough, the state, when we asked, Fred was with me, we had this discussion with Todd Richards, and somebody needs to be pounding on this guy. Todd Richards, the guy above all the guys at the Westboro for Fish and Wildlife in Massachusetts. I believe Todd Richards, Fred, correct me, he said, if you put catch and release on another one of these salter streams, it's like drawing a target on it. You're going to do nothing but attract the wrong element by creating a catch and release system. Is that what he said? We all know that's not true. But here's the guy at the top operating on this premise. Hopefully he'll be retiring soon.
Well, you also need to understand that Todd Richardson's salary is being paid by put-and-take fishermen buying licenses. So, that's where they're, if you watch the money, that's where they're.
So that's another reason why everybody should keep fishing, is because that license money really, really, really makes a difference. When 3.5 million or whatever it was came up to buy the headwaters of Red Brook, that came from Mass Wildlands Trust. Does anybody even know that there's a Mass Wildlands Trust? You know what Mass Wildlands Trust is? It's Mass Fish and Wildlife buying land as a land trust, using our license money to buy land. They're under the covers. Nobody wants anybody to know that they're there, but I know where they are and I know how they work, and it's really, really interesting that the state is so secretive about this stuff. I think Todd Richards is the reason we don't have a genetics program in Massachusetts. Please don't quote me on that. I need to, although it doesn't matter, I'm in Maine, who cares, right? So any other questions? We're going to wrap this up. Anybody want to come electrofishing tomorrow? Spencer, can you take the day off?
I have the presentation, I would have.
Crap. And you're going to be up in Hanover next year. Too bad. Anyway, it's been really great to do this. I love this space. It reminds me of the clubs I grew up in. I love the work that you guys are doing to get these different orgs meeting in this space. I think it's really exciting. I love the pond. I probably will never fish it. I don't fish much because I like fishing with electricity. Forgive me. But again, as I said, for me, it's more about the fish than the fishing. Sure, I love to fish, but I really want to be working, making more fish. So we're done. Thanks so much. Thank you.